Welcome to Series 1 of the Latte Lounge podcast. Join me, Katie Taylor, as we talk balancing hormones, busting myths, breaking taboos, boosting libidos, and bolstering confidence. Why not grab a coffee, take a seat, and join us in the Latte Lounge as we chat all things midlife, menopause, and beyond. With thanks to our friends at Silk Natural Lubricant for making this podcast possible. In this episode, we're going to be looking at how to speak to your doctor when you're concerned about your perimenopause symptoms and help you to understand how to best navigate the healthcare system in order to get the right diagnosis and treatment options for you. My guest today is perfectly placed to help you with this, having used her own personal experience to drive change in this country. She'll be sharing lots of very useful tips and advice to make sure nobody else suffers like she did. Diane Danzebrink is a personal therapist, consultant, and menopause counsellor with professional nurse training in menopause. She's the founder of the not-for-profit organisation Menopause Support, which offers menopause education, information, guidance, and support to the public. She's also the founder of the national Make Menopause Matter campaign, which calls for mandatory menopause education for GPs and menopause guidance in every workplace. It's already helped menopause get added to the school curriculum in England. Welcome, Diane. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, it seems absolutely crazy, doesn't it, that in this day and age, with modern medicine now being as sophisticated as it is, that we even need to be having this conversation about helping women to sort of get the right diagnosis and treatment from their doctors. So why are we? Where's it all gone wrong?
Well, it's exactly that, Katie. It's historical, isn't it? This is very much about how women's health has been viewed, has been talked about, has been managed over centuries. If we look back over centuries, women's health really was never a priority, chiefly because medicine was run by men.
Shocking,
Society was run by men. And, sort of to a greater extent, things didn't really start to change until quite recently. We're only at a situation now where we have a greater number of female GPs. Still, the vast majority of our gynecologists are men. So not just menopause, but women's health generally has been recorded, has been decided, has been, sort of pretty much in the power of people who are never going to experience many of the things that women do.
And it is interesting, isn't it? Because I guess if you sort of look back over time, women were, expected to be at home and bring up their children, and they weren't necessarily working. And obviously, as time has gone on, things like that have obviously got so much better in terms of equality. But, also, I guess, women didn't sort of go through menopause because I suppose a couple of hundred years ago, they were, the life expectancy of women was much, much shorter. So
I think we have to be careful about life expectancy and lifespan, because I often hear people say, oh, well, women were dead by the time they were 50, blah, blah, blah. Actually, you look back historically, and we know that many, many women lived into old age. So I think it's really important when we have these conversations, looking at, if you have two twins and one of those twins doesn't make their first birthday, well, their life expectancy is going to be less than 12 months. But if the second twin gets into their teenage years, and I'm obviously going back in history here, if the second twin gets into their teenage years, they are very likely to make old age. However, they could live to 80, but their combined life expectancy, when you put things into, kind of the pot of generalization, would be 40. But you could have one who dies before they're a year old and one who lives to their 80. So I think lifespan and life expectancy, it's very important to look at not just generalizations, but also at the wider picture.
And I guess women, in the past and even now, are so used to just not complaining and putting up with, situations, whether it's period pain or menopause symptoms or giving birth. And a lot of it, I suppose, also comes down to education, what you're actually taught. So in terms of, this podcast, I'm trying to obviously focus and make women aware of, in particular, perimenopause and menopause symptoms. But in terms of menopause care, where has it sort of gone wrong, where we are actually having to have these conversations about how to actually even get the right diagnosis in the first place?
So again, I think this goes back to this lack of professional education around women's health generally, particularly around sort of post-reproductive health, as gynecologists would call it, where there has really been no focus on post-reproductive health. But it's also about societal attitudes. So, we're not just women, but we're women who are aging as well. And we know how generally, youth is very much valued and praised. And particularly as women get older, many of them will talk about this feeling of being invisible, because nobody pays them any attention. And I think that attention is across the board into medical care as well. So I think we've got two things. One is we've had a lack of focus on women's health and menopause specifically. But I think the other thing is because none of us, the public, have never been informed. So menopause has not been included in sort of any kind of school curriculum until very recently. I think we also all grow up very much in a culture, certainly, sort of until the last few years, where menopause wasn't talked about sort of within the home, within families, even amongst mothers and daughters. So I think we have seen quite a huge shift. There's a lot more to do, but I think a lot of this is cultural and societal attitudes as well.
Yeah, and you talk about education. It's interesting, isn't it? We're taught at school, how to have a baby or how not to have a baby, and then there's this, and then it kind of stops. And we've always sort of thought of, well, I know I have, as women going through menopause as this sort of old grey-haired lady sitting in a rocking chair, fanning herself. And I think I certainly don't see myself looking like that. And I think one of the things I've learned since coming into this whole arena, 6 years ago now, is that I had no idea and was shocked to hear that, in medical school, there's almost no mandatory menopause training at all. And, you and I have talked a lot about this before, but, and I quote you when you say that GPs are our gatekeepers to health. And so I think that's where things are going wrong, that we're feeling certain symptoms, and yet we're not getting, the right diagnosis. So I guess it's about kind of connecting those dots, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, sort of it's really important to say that this medical healthcare education for our professionals, I think it does a huge disservice to our GPs and our practice nurses not to give them the education that they need to help their patients. It is, of course, it's frustrating as a patient. I've had experiences, as you know, of not getting the right help and support at the right time. And I would include gynecologists in that as well. Many gynecologists, they might be fabulous surgeons, they might be fabulous researchers, but they don't necessarily know anything about menopause, and that's madness. They should all have an understanding of menopause, particularly if they're going to be taking somebody's womb and ovaries away. But I think, as a lot of us have been campaigning to change this for a long time. These things do take time because you're looking at, huge sort of dinosaurs in terms of some of the organizations that you're having to work with. And some of those organizations are very complex. We have 32 medical schools in the UK. They all teach a slightly different curriculum, which again, you sort of think, well, hang on a minute, if our undergraduates are doing their basic education at a medical school, surely there should be a standard. And I believe that very soon that is going to be reviewed. So that would be another step forward. And my understanding is that menopause will be included in that review, which again is great and is brilliant for all of us who've been, sort of raising our voices now for what seems like years and years. But yeah, I mean, I always like to look at things from a common sense point of view. And for me, the common sense in this is, come on, government, let's have a public health campaign. Let's get it on the side of buses. Let's get it on tubes. Let's send every woman a booklet pre her 40th birthday, similar to the one for your cervical smear or your breast screening. Let's educate the public. That's a no-brainer. Then let's make sure that we educate all our up and coming medical students to give them the tools to do the job that they want to do to help their patients. Let's give a refresher to all our current GPs. That totally makes sense. I know lots of them would love to have had that training. Lots of them have gone out of their way to do some training for themselves. Many of them, to be fair to them, simply don't have time. They have to do a certain amount of CPD every year, but it doesn't have to be in women's health. But we do need to have one member of staff in every practice who specializes, but we also need that training across the board so that every GP can feel confident when half of their patient population will get to a stage in their lives where they're going to be perimenopausal.
And I mean, that just makes perfect sense to me. And we must add, because obviously some of the people that will be listening won't be UK based. Diane and I are both UK based. This is a global issue. And obviously we can only, campaign this side of the ocean in terms of our own government policy. But I mean, education is key to this, isn't it? And I know, we've got a downloadable symptom checklist on our website that we always ask women to fill out and take to their doctors. I know you have as well on your website, and you've got some fantastic posters. So it makes total sense to educate women, educate our healthcare professionals, and also I think, it'd be really, really helpful before we sort of talk about how to actually speak to your doctor, if maybe you could actually tell us about your own menopause journey, which led you to set up the work that you do.
Yeah, of course. So poor Katie has heard this story so many times.
No, listen, every time I hear it, I get sort of goosebumps, and it is shocking. So please don't worry about me.
I'll keep it brief. So we're going a long way back now. We go back, almost 10 years. So it was 2012. My health had deteriorated quite dramatically over a period of months. I'm terrible at going to the doctors. My husband finally pushed me into making an appointment to seeing the doctor. Initially, she did some blood tests. Nothing flagged up. She thought that perhaps I needed to try maybe using an iron supplement or something. She thought maybe I was run down. A few weeks later, I didn't feel any better, went back to see her. And she said, okay, let's run some more bloods. She ran some more bloods. And you always know, don't you, when your doctor calls you on the telephone, you always know that they've found something. And she said, look, I have found something, what's called your CA125, which is a protein that's in the blood. Is much higher than I would expect it to be, and it is that sort of indicates that one of the potentials, and I want to be really clear that this is not the only thing that CA125 can mark out, but one of the possibilities could be ovarian cancer. And the reason she said it is because my mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer many years before. I also want to say that that can also be an indication of pelvic inflammatory disease, of very benign conditions. So, you know, I don't want anybody to be, you know, sort of scared should their GP mention a raised CA125 to them. I then went into the system of lots of scans and lots of meetings, etc., etc. And it was decided by the gynecologist that I saw that because they'd found complex cysts on both my ovaries, that the best thing, given my continually rising CA125 and my mother's history, was that I should have a total hysterectomy. I knew having my ovaries removed would mean, and my womb, that I wouldn't have any more periods and that I would be in menopause. But for me, menopause meant hot flushes and no more periods. And unfortunately, as part of that process, nobody within the sort of clinical team took me aside at any point and said, you do realize that there are many, many symptoms. You could potentially experience some of these symptoms. You're only 45. We want to counsel you about HRT. Nobody mentioned any of that to me. And at the time, HRT was not really something that I'd ever sort of considered. And the only thing I'd ever heard about it was that it was scary and that it was linked with breast cancer. So as far as I was concerned, it was not something that I wanted to have anything to do with. Didn't even really occur to me that I would need it because nobody told me. Had my surgery. It was very, very complex. It turned out that as well as these complex cysts on both my ovaries, I had severe endometriosis. So what they call grade 4 endometriosis. I had a condition called adenomyosis, which Katie, I know you and I share. We share that history. And I also had a large fibroid. Knowing those things explained to me why I'd experienced such horrific periods and such awful, debilitating pain for so many years. But it also made me quite angry afterwards because, as I say, I'm not very good at going to the doctors. And the 3 or 4 times that I had tried to address it, I'd been brushed off. And that still kind of rankles with me, but let's not go there. I went home from the hospital 2 days after my surgery. I was given no information other than see your doctor, see how you're feeling, see your doctor in a few weeks' time. And to be fair, for the first few weeks, I was really concentrating on looking after myself as best I could, resting, nourishing myself well, starting some very gentle exercise where I could. And I thought I was doing okay. And then about 3 months in, things just went horribly wrong very quickly. I started to become increasingly anxious, and that anxiety over a period of weeks became absolutely crippling. I really struggled with work. I found it very, very difficult to do any kind of work at all. That was a huge pressure because I ran 2 small businesses at the time. One of my own and one with my husband. So that put a huge amount of pressure on him too. I became increasingly agoraphobic, didn't want to leave the house, even to walk my dogs, stopped answering the telephone, didn't want to see friends, didn't want anybody to come to the house. The only person that I would let come to the house was my mum. And eventually got to the point where I would not even open the post that came through the door because I'd become so irrational in my thinking that for me, anything that came through the door was going to be bad news, so I would avoid it. My husband and my mother both tried to persuade me to go back and see the doctor, and at one point my mum actually had to come and stay with us for a period of time because I became so scared of being on my own. And I'm sure that I don't know, maybe people will think, really, did you really have to do that? But there was a point where for me to have a shower a few feet from my bedroom, my mum would have to come and sit on the loo and sit in the room with me because I didn't want to be on my own. That's how awful it got. And it's when I look back at it now, I sort of think, how on earth did I turn into that person? It's given me, that experience has given me a huge amount of insight into what other people experience. And anyway, long story short, this went on, as I say, it went on for too long because I was so resistant to seeing the doctor. I was absolutely terrified that I would be put on a lifetime of antidepressants, or I would be admitted to a mental health unit. That's what I was really scared of, because I really felt I was going mad. And it came to a stage one day where I can't remember why, but for some reason I was on my own at home for a few hours. And I remember getting up in the morning, standing, looking out of my bedroom window and thinking, if this is what life is going to be like, I don't think I want this anymore. And it probably was a couple of hours later. I don't think I was thinking particularly clearly. At the time, I had 4 little Jack Russells, and I picked up the 4 little dogs, put them in the boot of my car, got in the car, which I hadn't done for probably months, started driving, got to a dual carriageway very close to where I live, and came within a hair's breadth of putting my car in front of a lorry. And the thing that stopped me was one of my dogs called Henry, who barked right, well, at the crucial, I didn't know it was the crucial moment, but at the crucial moment. And whatever my train of thought was, and you've heard me say this before, Katie, I genuinely can't tell you what that was. He broke it, and it brought me back into the moment. And I was absolutely horrified at what I'd almost done. And the reason I was so horrified was because I had my dogs in the car. And the reality hit me that if I'd have done what I was going to do, I'd have taken them with me. And it's that really horrified me. And in the moment, all I wanted to do was be back at home, but I was shaking, I was crying. Thankfully, I wasn't too far from home, and I managed to very, very slowly get back home. And I told my husband, as soon as he came in, I told him, and I didn't know, but he immediately got in touch with the GP practice and said, I need your help and I need it today. And very kindly, one of the GPs saw me that evening, and I sat in front of her and sobbed. And she was the first medical health professional. I'm so lucky that I saw who I saw, because she totally got it. And she was the first person to explain to me that you've had your ovaries removed. The vast majority of your estrogen is you can no longer make it. It's no longer available to your body. You have estrogen receptors all over your body. You know, your estrogen is highly expressed in your brain. This is the reason that you're struggling the way that you're struggling, but I want you to know that there is something I can do to help you, and I can do it today. And she said, HRT. And I said, but yeah, I'm really scared of that because I've heard all this scary stuff. And she took the time to explain all the factual, evidence-based information to me. She spent ages with me. And she said, look, she said, I would like you to try having an HRT patch, and I'd like you to put it on today. And then she arranged that she would follow up with me, that I could keep in contact with her, etc., etc. And I did put it on that day and went home that evening. It was a huge relief to have somebody explained to me, because I thought I was going mad. So having somebody explain to me, this is why this is happening to you, made such a difference. And I would say I'm always really careful about how I say this, because I don't want people to think that HRT is an overnight miracle. It's treatment, it's not magic, and it can take time to get it right. And I would say after a few days, the world didn't feel quite as scary as it had done. And that made me think that there was hope. And it was a process then about getting my HRT right. And that took quite a significant amount of time. Yeah, so that's me.
I mean, I however many times I hear this story, there's always a little bit of detail that I didn't hear the time before that shocks me. You know, you hadn't mentioned about your mum kind of sitting next to you in the bathroom, and I have to say that what so many people, and I say people because, you know, this affects everyone. This affects families, this affects men, this affects all people going through the menopause. And I think that we don't realize the psychological effects of having low estrogen, or no estrogen in your case at all. And I totally relate to so much, well, a lot of your story. I mean, not the, you know, the final part of your story, but that feeling of, for me, it was that feeling of impending doom. I actually remember being in such a dark place one night that I completely irrationally wrote a letter to all of my children, just wishing them well for the future. And I remember putting it in the filing cabinet and sort of my husband saying, you know, not to open just in case. And I look back now and I remember when I had, similar to you, went to see my doctor and finally got the right treatment, just running home and ripping up those letters and throwing them away, and just being shocked that would even enter my mind. So, you know, obviously I'm desperately upset and sorry that you went through that, but I think through your own experience, you know, it has obviously driven you to make sure, driven you to make sure that nobody else suffers again. And, you know, like you have. And I think that's why these conversations are just so important, because I think for every woman that shares their story and educates another woman that they're not going mad. And it's terrifying, because, you know, for me, I thought I was going through early onset dementia because I was forgetting words. You have a personality transplant, don't you, where, you know, your husbands don't even recognize you anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just awful. So look, I mean, whilst we're obviously on the subject, I mean, you know, there are so many different sort of platforms and social media sites and talking about different symptoms. And, you know, we talk about, you know, there can be up to 34, but there can probably be up to 50 or more. And it's these estrogen receptors that you were talking about that actually affect us all over our body. What would your advice be to anyone that's listening to this that can relate to perhaps your journey or my journey, in terms of what are the right steps in order to get the right treatment almost on day one, as soon as they're experiencing symptoms?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing, Katie, and again, it's a conversation we've had before, is about individuals, or those who are, you know, kind of the partners or family of individuals, being able to recognize those symptoms. Because I think we still sort of societally think about menopause happening to women in their 50s. And of course, very often perimenopause starts in the early 40s. Obviously, for those who go into premature menopause, it can happen significantly earlier. But I think if you're talking about the vast majority, you're going to be talking about perimenopausal symptoms in the early 40s. You know, if you're going through that, I think the most important thing is to have as much information as you can about not only the symptoms and what you can potentially do about it, but also if you're somebody who wants to approach your doctor, and many people do, is how I can best do that. So I think, you know, sort of some of the things that we regularly say to people are, first things first, be as prepared as you can for this short amount of time that you're probably going to have with them. So perhaps do something like fill in one of the online symptom checkers. There's one on menopause support, the menopause support website. If you're still having periods, keep a track of them so that you can take that information along with you too. If you can bear to have a look at the NICE guidance, it's not as scary as it sounds. It's only about 30 pages, and it's not just written for doctors, it's written for the public too. That will give you a really clear idea of what you should be able to expect from your doctor. If you're over 45, your doctor shouldn't be giving you a blood test to diagnose perimenopause. If you really feel that you are struggling emotionally, or you're struggling for perhaps word recall, and you're going to have a physical appointment with a doctor, take somebody with you, take support, take a good friend, take a partner, take a family member. They don't necessarily have to say something, but it can make a huge difference to have somebody just there as sort of moral support for you. You know, I think if you, and also perhaps don't necessarily expect to get what you need in that first appointment, because I always say to people, ask to see somebody in the practice who takes a special interest in menopause. If the receptionist says there isn't anybody, ask for somebody who takes a special interest in women's health. Hopefully there will at least be somebody who takes, and we are definitely seeing an improvement in doctors who have done some continued professional development. They've gone away and educated themselves because of all the awareness raising, which is absolutely brilliant. But, you know, if you do see a doctor who perhaps hasn't had the education that we would hope that they had had, then perhaps say to them, look, I have done my research. This is what I would like to try, because there should be an element of informed patient choice about this too. So this is what I would like to try. If you don't feel 100% confident to prescribe it to me, would you be kind enough to go and speak to a colleague about this, and we'll have a follow-up appointment? Now, I know they're not always easy to get within, you know, kind of a week or 2 weeks, but I think the more educated and informed we can be as individuals, I'm not saying that this should have to be the case, but I think where we are at the moment, the more we can help our doctors to help us, the better that experience will be.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of doctors, you know, they only have a 10-minute initial appointment. And I think they would be quite grateful that women have done their own research, because you kind of cut to the chase a bit, don't you? And if for anyone that's listening, if you're in the Latte Lounge membership, we've actually got a full guide on how to prepare for your doctor's appointment. And I'll obviously pop the link in our show notes about that, and the symptom checklists on both our website and Diane's website as well. So women have all the resources at hand to know how to prepare. So this, we were talking at the beginning that, you know, your own awful situation and story led you to start campaigning over here in the UK. Tell us a little bit about the campaign and its aims and where we are with it all now.
So yeah, so I originally sort of got to the point it was 2015 where I thought, okay, I have to sort of say something publicly about this, because I'd done a lot of research. I'd found an awful lot of people saying that they were struggling, that they felt like they were going mad, they didn't know who they were anymore. And I just remember turning to my husband one day and saying, how the hell can this possibly be right? We're half the population. If I ever feel well enough again, I'm just going to make damn sure I do something to change it. So in 2015, originally, I went on to the unfortunately no longer televised Victoria Derbyshire show. Huge mistake, BBC. That was a brilliant programme, and spoke about it for the first time. And that was the day that NICE guidance for menopause was published in the UK. So we'd never had official NICE guidance. So that seemed like a pertinent moment. Going on from there, I launched menopause support, sort of to try and help as many people as we could. But then I got to the point went on to create a Facebook group, and got to the point in 2018 where I thought, okay, so this is all good, but actually we need a national campaign. So wrote the aims of the Make Menopause Matter campaign, really as a reflection of what I'd been told so many times over and over again. And the key themes were GP education, people leaving the workplace, and not knowing enough about menopause. So the three key aims are, the first one is to have mandatory menopause education for all GPs and medical students. The second one is to have menopause awareness and support in every workplace. And the third was to have menopause included in the RSE curriculum in schools. As you know, Katie, because you have been to Westminster to campaign alongside me, fabulously, in July 2019, the then Education Secretary wrote to say that menopause would be included in the curriculum in England from September 2020. So it is now on the curriculum for England. To be fair, it came right in the middle of a pandemic. So, it's going to take a while for that to filter in to the curriculum, but it's there. And that's a huge achievement for the 174,000 people who have now signed and shared and supported the campaign, which is brilliant. As I said, there are changes coming in the medical school curriculum, which is fantastic. That's going to be, another tick in the box. The things are changing in the workplace all the time. You and I had a conversation the other day where we were talking about the work that we both do in the workplace now, going in and talking to teams, to line managers, etc., and how that has become really an organic movement where employers recognize that it makes sense for them to have menopause awareness and to offer their teams support so that they're not losing valuable members of staff. So that doesn't need, I don't think, to, be a policy as such. But it's great to see that, industry has recognized how important that is. So we are definitely moving in the right direction. There is a way to go, because you and I, both run platforms where we speak to lots of people every day who are still struggling. But as I say, we are also seeing experiences of people who say, actually, things are changing. I went to my GP, they were very helpful. They might not have known everything, but they were willing to go away and ask. And I think, with everything that's been done by all the doctors, all the campaigners, everything that's been in the media, I think, we are definitely going the right way. And as you will have heard me say many times before, I genuinely believe now that we will be the generation who will make menopause matter.
And hats off to you, Diane, because you have been relentlessly campaigning. And we've both said before that we're not going to sleep well until all those campaign aims have been ticked off. But you're absolutely right. And I think the UK are definitely leading the way, but the rest of the world is definitely catching up. And I think we always talk about the harms of social media, but actually social media has been very, very helpful to us generation of women, because we were able to set up Facebook groups, for both of us, for women to come and talk about their symptoms and say, oh right, I'm not alone, I'm not going mad. And I think now with the introduction of Instagram and obviously Twitter, I think people can't hide away from the issues anymore. And the government in the UK have been listening. They've set up a women's health strategy now, and they put menopause front and center. And that so much of that is thanks to your relentless hard work. So the future of menopause care does look a lot brighter. Rome wasn't built in the day. So although we're getting tired of the same conversation 6 years later, I'm hopeful that by the time at the time my daughter's my age, it'll just be it'll just be ancient
normal
history.
Conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ancient history. Yeah. And listen, before we go down, where can people find out more about you and the campaign, and most importantly, to sign the petition? And I will put the links in the show notes. But
fabulous.
Please,
yeah. So there's lots of information about what we do at menopausesupport.co.uk. You can also find information about the campaign there. It's the Make Menopause Matter campaign. And I would be enormously grateful if you would have a look at it and not just sign it, but also share it in your own communities or on your own social media platforms, because the more of us that raise our voices together, the bigger our voice becomes. And that means that as a grassroots community, we will be part of making this change for the future. And I think that's something that we will all be able to sit at the end of our days and be very proud of.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Diane, for joining me, and congratulations on everything that you do for womankind.
My pleasure, lovely. And thank you for your ongoing and staunch support over these years.
It's been a pleasure. If you've enjoyed this podcast and would like extra support with managing your menopause symptoms, then why not consider becoming a Latte Lounge member? Members get access to members-only masterclasses with medical specialists and wellbeing experts, members-only content, how-to guide and resources, plus a chance to connect with other women just like you in a warm, friendly, private community. Podcast listeners get to join for just £10 for the first month. See show notes for more details. Thanks for listening to the Latte Lounge podcast. Please subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss our next episode. For more support with all things menopause and midlife, head to our website lattelounge.co.uk and search for the Latte Lounge group on Facebook. This podcast was sponsored by Silk Natural Lubricant and produced by Emily Crosby Media.